A car wreck, a natural disaster, an active shooter, a terrorist event, or even the complete collapse of society itself, any of these things could be what constitutes your worst day ever. And the question as a man is, are you prepared for any of those things? And if you aren't, then your job is to start preparing today. Welcome back to Read Like a Man. My name is Paige, and today I want to talk about 3 books that I think are essential reads for any guy who takes his role as a protector seriously. If you want to be prepared for the day when, not if, but when the hits the fan, you need to read these books and start thinking about this now. And as a bonus, at the end of this video, I want to give you a recommendation for what I think is the best book on this whole subject from a Christian perspective, and one that really balances the idea of how do we prepare in this life while also realizing that life is not just about this life. So stick around for that one to the end. The first book that I want to talk about is The Disaster Diaries by Sam Sheridan, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Apocalypse. This is his kind of journey after he became a father into taking this whole idea of prepping much more seriously. He talks about how when he was a single guy, it never really crossed his mind. Like none of these things like really ever bothered him that much. And then he got married, and then they had their first kid, and he was away on a trip. And he was like on the other side of the world, and was just talking about laying there at night and having nightmares every night about his wife and his son, and something bad happening and him not being there to protect them. And it just brought this realization and this weight onto him of realizing, like, there's so much more responsibility on me to know how to take care of things when the worst thing happens. My wife and my kid now are looking at me to be able to handle anything that comes about in life. And so this whole conversation, I want to start with a quote from this book where he says, and I'm going to butcher this name, but he says, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, I don't know, maybe, has written, being a man is precisely being responsible. That's the secret philosophy of real manhood. A man takes responsibility for everything that happens. He never, ever makes excuses. If it's bad, he should have seen it coming and avoided it. He's a master of his fate. And I love that whole mindset. And that's why I put this book first, because this book, if you can get what he's talking about at the beginning of it, it will set you on the right path going down this idea of getting prepared. Because the idea behind it is that I'm going to step into the responsibility that I have as a man to fulfill the role that I have as a man and as the protector of those who are weaker than me. And it's this thing, not that I can do it perfectly and not that I'm going to have every skill that I possibly need, but I'm going to work every day to get better at it. So the first book is going to be this one. This is a very, very readable book, and I love the way that Sam wrote it, because each chapter is kind of his envisioning of an apocalypse that could happen, right? And it's kind of like his novel, if you will, of walking through the things. But then this is just a great book because Sam's just a normal dude. Like he's not an expert writing this book. He's a normal dude talking about his experience going out and being trained by people who are experts. So he has a very unique perspective on everything, and it's a very kind of everyman tale that you're like, oh, I could do that, as opposed to some of these other books, and even one I'm going to mention next, that it's like he's not a special operations dude. He's not a whatever dude. He's not this guy this has been his whole life. He's just a guy, just a normal dude who decided, hey, I want to make this a little bit more important in my life, and then tells his story of how he did that and the places that he went to look for information, and then what he did with what he learned and how he kind of changed his daily rhythms and stuff to build resilience and build preparedness in his life. So that's the first book. Pick up that one. It's an easy read. You'll go through it. I went through it in just a couple days, but it will get you the kick in the pants that you need to really get going and have a solid start on this whole journey. And then after you finish the Disaster Diaries, I want you to get Prepared by Mike Glover. Now, Mike is one of those expert guys. This dude literally has made preparedness his whole identity since getting out of the military. So he is a badass, was a badass, always will be a badass, but he is an expert who has a very balanced approach to the whole subject matter. And he presents it in a way that I feel like is not completely overwhelming. And instead of being like, you have to do all this, he's like, hey, here's like the crazy, like, here's the all out that you could do. Here's what I do. Like, here's all out. This is my overlanding rig with all the stuff and blah, 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 blah. And you can really go ham with this if you want, like I do. But at a minimum, just throw a space blanket in your car for every single person in your family, right? And he does a really, really good job of kind of helping you to take some of the pressure off and realize all the different domains and the areas where you need to be more prepared in your everyday life, but then giving you a baseline and a minimum, just like, dude, if you just do this, you're going to be so much better off than what you were before. So he walks through talking about mindset, talking about situational awareness, talking about decision-making under pressure and how to build that skill and that ability. He talks about your EDC. He talks about he has a mobility chapter talking about your rigs, and a really, really good section. He actually had a buddy who died, not necessarily because he couldn't do what he needed to, but he had a friend who was on a motorcycle and in a car accident right in front of him. And he has to live with the weight that he wasn't as prepared as he could be. And he probably couldn't have saved his friend's life, but he didn't have what he needed to save his friend's life and to give it the best shot. And so he has a ton of weight that carries on that. So he has a whole chapter about mobility and this whole section about what you should carry in your car and how likely it is that you will be in or come upon a car wreck with like fatal injuries to people, right? And talking about being prepared with that. And then he has a final chapter talking about homesteading. So it's really kind of the whole gamut. And he is like this is his life, so he goes full bore, like whole hog on this. And so he gives you this is the ideal that you could move towards and try to live up to. But he also does a really good job of giving just kind of the minimum of like, okay, just start by just doing this, like at least do this, at least take this step, at least think about this thing, right? So after you kind of get the wheels spinning with the Disaster Diaries, then I want you to move to Prepared by Mike Glover and start to get some more specifics and start to get a better idea of how could this work for me. And what does my life look like? And what does being prepared in my life look like? My favorite quote from this prepared book, and really what I want you to come away with it the most of, is this section where he's talking about seismic activity, and he's talking about how deadly earthquakes and stuff can be. And then he says, but if you live in Florida or Scandinavia or Malta or Qatar, all places with incredibly minor and infrequent seismic activity, you probably shouldn't waste time or money preparing for the big one. You'd be much better off preparing for hurricanes or blizzard or heat waves or drought, because those will happen more frequently precisely where you live. And while they are less deadly on average, your increased exposure to them will increase the probability that you end up in the middle of one of the bad ones. And this was really what I loved about this book, was he says, it's impossible to be prepared for anything and everything, but it's very possible to be prepared for everything that has any real chance of happening based on where you live, what you do for work, and how you live your life. And so this book will just help you think more about that and think more realistically about, based on my circumstances, what are the things that I need to be prepared for? Because I can't be prepared for anything and everything, but I can be prepared, and I can be cognizant, and I can have thought about, and I can have a plan for the things that are most likely to happen based on the life that I live. So Prepared by Mike Glover, that's book number 2. And then the third book that I want you to read, I don't actually have a physical copy of, but it's called Left of Bang. And this is by Patrick Van Horn, and it's about the Marine Corps Combat Hunter program. And this book is much more kind of big picture mindset, but specifically about threats that relate to other humans. So Disaster Diaries is a lot of kind of everything, from end of the world to zombies to people to all the stuff. Prepared is natural disasters all the way up to bad guys doing bad things. Left of Bang is literally just a book about bad guys doing bad things, right? So it's a book about the human elements and the way that a human being can be what causes you to be having the worst day of your life. So this book is the last one that I want you to read, but it's uber important because it is going to help train your mind and give you tools and words to express how you can observe human nature and establish baselines for it based on where you are at, observe things that don't match the baseline, and be ahead of something bad happening. The term that they have, left of bang, is literally on a timeline. Like left, is more to the beginning of sides. So you want to be aware of the problem before bang happens. Whether bang is a gunshot, whether bang is a bomb, doesn't matter. You want to be aware of it and have taken action before the timeline gets to that point. So left of bang specifically talks about 6 domains of how we're observing and classifying human behavior and making judgment calls based on that. So those domains are kinesics, which is conscious and subconscious body language; biometric cues, which is biological and autonomic responses in people; proxemics, which is interpersonal and spatial interaction between people; geographics, which is the patterns of behavior within a certain environment; iconography, which is expression through symbols and getting tattoos and gang symbols and all that kind of stuff; and then atmospherics, which is just the collective attitude of a place and the distinct moods within an environment. And so learning these domains, they're stuff that you kind of know subconsciously and that you're aware of a little bit in the back of your mind, and to varying degrees for certain people. Certain people are much more aware of them just starting out. But they are a terminology and a framework and a set of reference points to help you establish a baseline of any environment, and then notice things that don't align to that baseline, so that you pay more attention to a certain person or a certain group of people or a certain situation, so that you can react before bang. You can be ahead of whatever bad thing is going to happen. And so this book is an essential read, and it's not one that you can just read one time and then move on with. It's one that you need to kind of refresh your mind on a bunch and start to implement in daily life, and think through a bunch of different times. It really helps to talk through people with it and start to use those terms, because the other reason for those terms is if you've gotten this far, right, now you're probably EDCing, and now if something bad does go down and all of a sudden you have to draw your weapon and you have to engage in a fatal encounter, you want to have a framework of words that you can use and references that you can use to help justify those actions to yourself, to other people, to whoever, right? So this whole frame of reference just starts to give a commonality of language to help you communicate with the other good guys in this scenario, right? So Left of Bang, Patrick Van Horn, that's the 3rd book. Between these 3, Disaster Diaries, Prepared, and Left of Bang, if you read those and you really start to integrate them into your life, you will be so much better prepared for when the hits the fan in this life. But if you are a Christian like me, you also want to balance this whole thing with how do I prepare in this life, and how do I stay safe in this life, and how do I live well in this life, with knowing that not everything is about this life. And so if you want a book that talks about this whole subject matter from a deeply Christian perspective and an integrated perspective between this life and the next, I cannot recommend The Warrior Poet Way by John Lovell enough. John is a complete badass. He and Mike are friends, and John has a ton of stuff in here about living prepared and living well, but it is all from a deeply rooted Christian belief and an understanding that not everything is about this life, and that this life is not more important than the eternal life that we're all going on to live. And so this one is essential reading for any man in my book. I have a full video about this. I'll link up here. You can watch my whole review on this video. But yeah, that's kind of my bonus pick. If you specifically want something from a Christian perspective, definitely pick this one up. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.